It's the dead of winter. You live alone, completely isolated, miles from anywhere, in a cabin you built with your own hands on a spot known locally as Widow's Perch. The only sound is the wind, cold, sharp, and howling like something hungry out in the deep woods. You're warm, safe, reading an old book, sipping hot coffee, completely cut off from the world. And then just past midnight there's a knock. It's impossible. No one comes here. No one even knew this place existed. But the knocking comes again, softer this time, weaker. Like whoever is out there is barely holding on. When Hawthorne finally opens that heavy wooden door, he doesn't find a lost hiker or a neighbor seeking shelter. He finds her. A small, thin figure, not human but alien, collapsing into the snow. Clothed in torn rags. Her skin is a pale purple, her hair tangled with ice, and her bare feet are bleeding into the deep snow. What choice do you make? Do you turn away the creature at your door? Or do you risk everything, your safety, your solitude, maybe even your life, to save a stranger who has nothing left? This is the true story of how a single act of kindness in the cold night turned a simple wooden cabin into the most dangerous and most hopeful place in the entire galaxy. You won't believe what happens next, or the powerful enemy Hawthorne just invited to his doorstep. Before we dive deep into this incredible story of rescue, redemption, and defiance, a story I promise you will not want to skip, please take a moment to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a little hope, and most importantly, subscribe and ring that notification bell. It genuinely helps me reach a larger audience so I can keep bringing you these epic tales. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching this story from? And feel free to drop your suggestions for future sci-fi stories. Now let's get back to the Widow's Perch and the alien girl named Ashale. Hawthorne froze at the first sound, knock, knock. His heart hammered against his ribs. The cold wind howled outside his small wooden cabin deep in the forest of Widow's Perch, sharp like knives. He lived here for the quiet, the simplicity, and the distance from the busy world. Isolation was his currency and someone was trying to spend it. Knock, knock. This time it was barely a sound, a faint plea. Hawthorne grabbed his flashlight and moved to the door. He opened it slowly, snowflakes drifting in the light. The sight that greeted him made him forget how to breathe. A girl clearly non-human and alien. She was impossibly small, dangerously thin, and wrapped in torn rags that offered zero protection against the snow that fell thick outside. Her skin was a pale, striking purple. Her long hair was wet, tangled, and matted with ice. She wore no shoes. Her feet were cut and bleeding onto the ground. She looked up at him with tired, glowing eyes and then she simply gave out and collapsed. Hawthorne dropped to his knees in the snow. Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted, trying to wake her. There was no response. Her body was too cold. Instinct completely took over. Without hesitation, he lifted her carefully into his arms and carried her quickly inside, closing the door on the storm. He gently placed her near the crackling fire. He wrapped her in the thickest wool blanket he owned and brought warm water. Her hands were icy and shook uncontrollably. He checked her pulse. It was weak but miraculously still beating. Hawthorne had never seen an alien up close. Sure, the news reported that aliens lived on other planets, and some visited controlled human spaceports. But this? A lone alien girl in a raging snowstorm, knocking on his forgotten door? It defied all logic. She stirred under the blanket, her lips moving, whispering something in a language he didn't recognize. "Easy now," Hawthorne said, his voice soft, reassuring. "You're safe here." Her eyes snapped open, wide with deep-seated fear. She tried to sit up, but her weak body wouldn't allow it. When Hawthorne reached out to simply take her hand, she flinched violently. "It's okay," he repeated, holding his hands up to show they were empty and harmless. "I won't hurt you." Her frantic breathing slowed a fraction. She watched the fire, blinking rapidly as if fighting to stay conscious. Hawthorne went to his small kitchen and quickly poured hot soup into a bowl. He returned and knelt beside her. "Here," he offered. "You need this." She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, with shaking hands, she took the bowl. She drank the soup desperately, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Hawthorne watched quietly. She wasn't dangerous, she was terrified and starving. When the soup was gone, she set the bowl down. Her eyes closed slowly, her head resting exhausted against the chair's leg. She was instantly fast asleep. That night, Hawthorne couldn't sleep. He sat near her, watching the fragile rise and fall of her chest. Questions flooded his mind. Why was she here? Was she being chased? Had she escaped something truly terrible? Her feet were badly cut. Her arms were covered in bruises. Her clothes were barely rags. It looked like she had been deliberately cast away. He sighed, throwing another log onto the fire. I don't know who you are, he whispered to the sleeping girl. But you found the right door. Morning crept in with gray light filtering through the frosted windows. Hawthorne cooked eggs and bread. The girl was still curled up near the fire, looking peaceful, but her face showed the truth: pain, fear, and utter exhaustion. When she woke, she jumped, startled, her hands instantly raised to protect herself. Hey, hey, Hawthorne said, raising his own hands in a sign of surrender. It's just me. You're okay. She looked around, confused, before her eyes fixed on the food. She reached for it, then stopped, waiting for permission. Hawthorne nodded gently. Go ahead. She ate quickly once more. Hawthorne realized she still hadn't spoken, beyond the incomprehensible whispers. He decided to try and communicate. He pointed at himself and said clearly, Hawthorne. He repeated it slower, Hawthorne. She watched him, tilted her head, and then weakly echoed, Hawthorne. His eyes widened. Success. Yes, that's me, Hawthorne. Then he pointed to her. You? She looked down, unsure, hugging herself. No name. He asked gently, but she gave no answer. Hawthorne stood up, grabbed his notepad, and drew a simple stick figure of himself, writing Hawthorne underneath. Then he drew a small stick girl with large eyes and pointed to her. She stared at the sketch for a long time. Then, in a soft whisper, she spoke a word he couldn't understand. It sounded like, Elara. He wrote it down. Elara, he repeated. Her eyes sparkled. She gave a tiny, tired nod. Okay, Elara, he said with a soft smile. You're safe here. You don't need to run anymore. But even as he spoke the words, Hawthorne felt a chilling certainty deep inside. This was only the beginning. Something had driven her here, to his remote cabin. And whatever it was, it might just come knocking next. The girl, Elara, sat curled near the fire, completely hidden in Hawthorne's thick blanket. Her arms were tucked away, and her body still shivered a little from the profound cold she had endured. Her large, glowing eyes were constantly moving, watching everything in the cabin. She rarely blinked. Hawthorne sat across the room, giving her space, determined not to frighten her. The only sound was the comforting crackle of the fire. She looked utterly lost, more like a traumatized child than anything else, though she was clearly not human. Hawthorne offered her a gentle smile, but she couldn't return it. Her fingers were thin and trembling as she held a cup of warm soup he had poured. She sipped slowly, almost hesitantly, like someone not used to the luxury of calm eating. He noticed how she flinched slightly whenever the wind outside hit the windows too hard. Her entire demeanor suggested she was conditioned to believe that loud sounds equaled immediate danger. He watched her silently for a long time. She persistently avoided eye contact. He had cleaned her wounded feet earlier with warm water and a cloth. Although she hadn't physically resisted, she had gone stiff with profound fear the entire time. She hadn't said a word since whispering her name, Elara, the night before. Hawthorne stood up, retrieved a second, softer blanket, a family heirloom his mother had given him years ago. He held it out to her gently. It's softer, he said, keeping his voice low and calm. Elara didn't move. He knelt down and placed the blanket a short distance away from her. If you want it, it's yours. Her eyes studied him intently, a long silence passing between them. Then, slowly, she leaned forward and took the second blanket. She immediately wrapped it around herself, hiding her face for a moment. Hawthorne saw her small body relax just slightly. He sat back down and began sketching in his notepad, simple things: a tree, a sun, the cabin. After a while, he felt her eyes on him. He looked up and saw Elara watching, curious but cautious. He smiled and showed her the drawing of the cabin. Home, he said, pointing to the sketch. She tilted her head, staring at the shape. He drew his own stick figure next to the house. Hawthorne, he stated. Then he drew a smaller figure with big eyes like hers and wrote, Elara, underneath. She blinked, looking from the drawing to him. She touched the picture with one finger very gently, then quickly pulled her hand back, unsure if she was permitted to interact. It's okay, he assured her softly. You can stay here. Her lips parted, trying to form a word, but nothing came out. She lowered her eyes, hiding her face in the blanket. Hawthorne knew that her issue wasn't just physical cold or exhaustion. She was damaged. Something had taught her that speaking, or even existence, was dangerous. He got up and brought her a small plate of bread and fruit from the kitchen. He placed it on the table near her, then walked back to his chair, consciously giving her space. A few minutes passed. Then quietly she leaned forward and picked up a piece of bread. She ate slowly as though she couldn't quite trust the food not to vanish. Hawthorne felt a tightening in his chest. He had always been a solitary man, one who avoided getting involved. But now this strange, silent alien girl was in his home, wrapped in his blankets, sitting by his fire, and something deep inside him made him care. That night, as the snowstorm intensified, Hawthorne made a small, comfortable bed for her near the fire. Soft cushions, warm blankets, and an old pillow. She didn't fight him when he helped her lay down, but as he turned to walk away, she suddenly grabbed his sleeve. He stopped instantly. She looked up at him with wide, pleading eyes. No words, just fear and a desperate need for presence. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked softly. She didn't nod, but her grip didn't loosen. So he sat near the fire again, silent. After some time, her small hand slowly released his sleeve. Her eyes closed and she fell asleep. Hawthorne watched the flames reflect on her pale face. Her breathing became steady, almost peaceful. But she was still clutching the blanket tightly, as if it were the only thing that could protect her. He didn't know her past. He didn't know her future. But he knew one thing for certain: she was utterly alone. And for some cosmic reason she had found her way to him. The next morning, the fragile piece Hawthorne had managed to build shattered. Elara woke up crying. Her small body trembled and her fists clutched the blanket tightly. She made no sound, no scream, no shout, but silent tears streamed down her cheeks. Her breathing was heavy, ragged, as if she had been running in her sleep. Hawthorne rushed from the kitchen and crouched beside her gently. "Elara, hey, it's okay," he said, keeping his voice low and calm. She wouldn't look at him. Her eyes were wide, lost in some terrifying memory that was far, far away. She kept shaking her head, desperately trying to erase something from her mind. Hawthorne knew better than to touch her right then. He just sat there patiently waiting. After a few minutes, the shaking began to subside, but her face remained pale and full of fear. He handed her a warm cup of tea. She hesitated, but after a moment she accepted it, taking the cup with both hands. It was then that Hawthorne noticed her wrists. They were thin, bruised, and covered in faded marks. They were not fresh wounds, but they looked exactly like the marks left by chains. Something inside Hawthorne went cold, then snapped quietly. He had suspected she had suffered, but seeing those deep, residual signs confirmed it. Someone had locked her up, chained her, and maybe done something much, much worse. He stood up slowly and walked to the table. He pulled out his notepad and began drawing again. This time he sketched a chain and a pair of locked hands. He brought the drawing back to her and pointed to it. Elara froze. She stared at the sketch, her fingers tightening their grip on the warm cup. "Did someone do this to you?" he asked, his voice soft, careful. She didn't answer, but her lips pressed into a hard, thin line, and her eyes welled up with tears again. She looked away, hiding her face. Hawthorne sighed. He didn't want to pressure her, but he needed to understand what she had escaped from. More critically, he needed to know if someone would come looking for her. He erased the chain drawing and replaced it with a stick figure holding a key. He then drew a second figure in chains. The first figure opened the chains and set the second free. Next to the free figure he wrote the words, "Safe, free." Elara stared at the drawing for a long time. Slowly she traced her finger over the free figure. Then very quietly she whispered two words. They sounded like "No Karar." Hawthorne blinked. "No Karar?" he repeated, trying to get the pronunciation right. "Is that what they called you?" She nodded slowly. The word sounded alien, yet held a cold familiarity now. Hawthorne wrote the word Nokar next to the chained figure. "Slave?" he asked carefully, watching her reaction. Her face flinched violently and she pulled her hands back. But she didn't deny it. A cold, intense anger began to rise inside Hawthorne. Someone had treated her like property, like a slave. She wasn't just lost, she had escaped something truly awful. He walked over to a shelf and pulled down an old wooden box. Inside were small tools and scraps of metal left over from the years he had spent fixing broken machines. He brought the box over, showed her a few pieces, and then pointed to the notepad again, drawing a broken chain. She tilted her head, confused. Hawthorne smiled gently and whispered, "Let's make sure you're never chained again." Elara didn't understand his words, but something in his expression, his intent, made her relax. He handed her a tiny metal ring, not a real chain, just a small piece of scrap metal. She held it, stared at it, and then slowly, intentionally, bent it in half until it snapped. Hawthorne clapped softly. For the very first time, Elara offered a small, tired, but real smile. That night, she sat beside the fire closer to him than before. She still didn't speak much, but she watched intently as he repaired an old flashlight, seemingly fascinated by every small tool he used. When he offered her a screwdriver, she hesitated, then took it and carefully mimicked his motions. They didn't share a language, but something unspoken was beginning to build between them. Later, as Hawthorne gently tucked her in with the soft blanket again, she whispered something unexpected. Hawthorne. He looked at her, surprised. She said his name again, clearer this time, Hawthorne. He smiled wide. That's me. She pointed at herself. Elara. He nodded. Elara. Then she said another word, one that made Hawthorne's heart stop. Thank. She struggled to finish the thought. Thank you. Hawthorne felt a lump in his throat. She was trying. After the silence, after the chains, she was making an effort to connect. You're welcome, he whispered, his voice cracking just a little. She smiled again, a little braver now. But deep inside, Hawthorne knew something dark still lived in her past. Chain memories didn't just vanish overnight. She had found warmth, a bed, and someone who didn't see her as an object. But the people who had once owned her, who left those terrible marks on her skin, were still out there. And maybe, just maybe, the Orid Dominion wanted her back. 3 days passed in relative peace. Elara no longer shook when Hawthorne handed her food. She now sat near the table during breakfast, still quiet but noticeably calmer. She had picked up a few human words: warm, blanket, safe. Every time she spoke one, Hawthorne smiled and nodded, encouraging her. Her eyes were no longer filled with panic, but something new, something like hope. She no longer flinched when he entered the room. She even helped him sort his metal tools, copying how he cleaned and arranged each piece. She was especially fond of the flashlight. She would turn it on and off, laughing softly as if the small beam of light was pure magic. For Hawthorne, hearing her laugh even once was worth everything. But on the 4th night, the illusion of safety dissolved. It began with a strange hum. Faint, distant, but steadily growing louder. Hawthorne was outside chopping firewood when he heard it. He looked up. The sky was dark, heavy with slow-moving snow, but something unnatural glowed through the clouds. Moving lights. Not stars. Not aircraft. Something else entirely. Hawthorne dropped the axe and ran back inside the widow's perch. Elara, he called out. She was by the fire, playing with the screwdriver he had given her. When she saw the fear on his face, her small smile instantly faded. They're here, he whispered, quickly locking the heavy wooden door behind him. She didn't ask who. She knew. The humming grew into a powerful roar. A deep vibration rattled the cabin windows. Elara stood up, her body frozen solid. Hawthorne grabbed her hand and quickly led her to the small back storage room. He pulled open the trapdoor leading to the basement. Hide here, he commanded. Stay quiet. She shook her head desperately, afraid to be alone. Hawthorne placed both hands on her shoulders. I'll keep them out. You stay safe. She stared at him, then gave a slow, small nod of agreement. Slowly she climbed down into the cold, dark space below. He closed the trapdoor, threw a thick rug over it, and quickly turned off the last light in the cabin. Then he waited in the suffocating silence. Seconds later, a knock came. It wasn't soft or weak like hers had been. It was a heavy, loud, demanding knock that made the entire cabin wall shake. Hawthorne walked to the door, but he didn't open it. Who's there? He shouted. A cold, metallic, sharp voice answered. We are looking for a unit. Female. Small. Escape. She was seen on this planet. We traced her here. Hawthorne didn't respond. The voice continued, flat and emotionless. We know you are inside human. This is not your concern. Give her to us. He kept his hand on the reinforced door, thinking fast. There's no one here but me, he shouted back. A pause followed. Then the voice cut through the stillness. Open or we enter by force. Hawthorne slowly reached under the table and pressed a hidden button on an old console. It was a basic defense system he had set up years ago, designed only to deter thieves. It wouldn't kill anyone, but it would slow them down. Outside, something hissed, a strange sound of steam and grinding metal, and then boom. They tried to break the door. The wooden cabin shuddered violently, but the old reinforced door held fast. The defense system activated. Red lights blinked rapidly on the porch. A loud, screaming alarm blared out into the night. Then a heavy silence returned. Hawthorne stood perfectly still, his heart pounding in his ears. Then the voice returned, colder than before. You protect a product that does not belong to you. Hawthorne shouted back, pure anger rising in his throat. She's not a product. She's a person. Another long silence. Then the voice said one last thing before the sound of retreating steps faded into the cold night. You have made an enemy. We will return. Hawthorne didn't move until the strange, unnatural lights in the sky disappeared completely. Only then did he move to the trapdoor. Hawthorne didn't move until the unnatural lights in the sky had vanished completely, taking the chilling hum of the Aureate Dominion with them. Only then did he feel safe enough to move to the trapdoor. He yanked the rug back and lifted the heavy wooden lid. Elara sat inside, clutching her knees to her chest, surrounded by the cold, damp dark. When she saw him, she stood up quickly. "Gone?" she asked, her voice a small, strained whisper. Hawthorne nodded, his own voice heavy with exhaustion. "For now." She climbed out, her legs visibly shaking, but her focus wasn't on her own escape. She sank down beside him, burying her face in his shoulder. "They hurt many," she whispered, the words trembling. "Not just me." Hawthorne closed his eyes tightly. He didn't want to dwell on the terrible images of what she had seen, what she had lived through as one of the Nokari. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her small frame. "You're safe with me," he reassured her, but even as he said it, he knew it was a temporary, fragile shield. They had found her. They would absolutely return. And next time they wouldn't just knock. They would come for blood. But Hawthorne made his promise right then, silently, fiercely. Whatever they were, whoever had once called her a Nokar slave, they would have to go through him first. He wasn't giving her up. Not now. Not ever. The fire had long gone cold by the time morning came, and neither of them had truly slept. Elara sat near the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, her eyes wide and empty. She hadn't touched the breakfast Hawthorne had made. He noticed her fingers trembling again, just like they had when she first arrived. All the fragile peace and hope they had carefully nurtured over the past few days had been completely shattered the moment those terrifying aliens knocked on his door. Hawthorne made tea and placed a cup beside her. She didn't look at it and she didn't look at him. She just stared outside, watching the fresh snowfall like it was slowly swallowing the world. He finally broke the heavy silence. "Elara, you are not safe out there. If they find you again." Her voice was soft and shaking when she finally spoke. "I can go." Hawthorne turned toward her, confused, the words not registering immediately. "What?" She looked up at him, her eyes wet with tears. "I can go. If I am a problem." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. They were the product of years of abuse, a deeply ingrained belief that her very existence caused trouble. He stepped forward, kneeling beside her, forcing himself to meet her eyes. "Elara, listen to me. You are not a problem. You are not the reason this happened. They are the reason." She hugged her knees tighter. "They hurt anyone who helps. They will hurt you too. I don't want that." Hawthorne sat down next to her, his voice firm but calm. "You think I'm afraid of them?" Elara didn't answer. He smiled gently. "Well, maybe I am," he admitted honestly, a flash of human vulnerability. "But that doesn't mean I'll let you walk out into the snow and disappear just to save my own skin." She looked down, whispering a horrifying belief. "I was always told I don't belong anywhere. That no one would ever want a broken thing." Hawthorne frowned deeply. "You're not broken, Elara," he insisted. "You're healing. And that is completely different." But she didn't believe him. He could see it in her face, the way the years of being treated like property, of suffering abuse, had buried her self-worth deep beneath shame and crippling fear. Hawthorne stood up and walked over to his cabinet. He pulled out an old, scratched wooden box, a container that had traveled with him for decades, full of artifacts from his past. Photos, small carvings, even a folded, slightly faded flag from his time in service long ago. He brought it to her and sat beside her again. "Let me show you something," he said, opening the box. He took out a small, roughly carved wooden star. "My father made this for me when I was just a kid." He turned it over in his hand. "I dropped it once, right after he gave it to me. Cracked the edge. I thought it was completely ruined." Elara watched quietly, her eyes following the star. "But my dad told me," Hawthorne continued, his voice softer, "don't throw it away. Fix it. It still shines." He handed the small wooden star to her. "See this part here?" He pointed to the faint line of the glued-up crack. "I glued it back. It's not perfect. You can still see the break. But it's still mine. It's still strong." Elara held the star carefully, tracing the crack with one delicate finger. Hawthorne leaned closer. "You've been hurt, Elara. You have scars, both visible and invisible. But that doesn't make you any less worthy of care. Or love." Her lips parted slightly, as if those words didn't even make sense in the universe she came from. Her entire world was built on the concept of worthlessness. "I don't want you to go," Hawthorne said, his voice firming up with emotion. I want you to stay. You are not a guest here. You're family now. Her breath hitched. She looked down and a tear splashed onto the wooden star she held. But I can't give anything back, she whispered, her voice cracking with guilt. Hawthorne chuckled softly, a genuine sound of warmth. You already have. You gave this quiet, old cabin life again. You made it feel full. For a long, long moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, she leaned her head against his shoulder. I don't know how to be part of something, she confessed in a quiet voice. You'll learn, he replied gently. One step at a time. They sat in silence like that, the only sound the soft wind brushing against the windows. Later, Hawthorne made lunch and this time Elara ate with him sitting at the table not tucked away in the corner. She even managed a small tired smile when he jokingly complained about burning the soup. But peace never lasted long. That night, Hawthorne stood at the heavy front door double-checking the locks. He had added a makeshift barrier of furniture, just in case. Elara stood behind him, watching his every move, her small shadow blending with his own. They will come back, she said quietly. I know, Hawthorne replied, testing the strength of the deadbolt. You can still give me to them, she added, her voice flat, presenting it as a simple solution. It would end this. Hawthorne turned around quickly, his expression hardening. Elara, listen to me closely. I will never give you to them. Not for peace, not for safety, not for anything. She looked at him, something shifting in her large, glowing eyes, something brave and resolute rising to the surface, pushing back the fear. You really mean that? He nodded without hesitation. You knocked on my door that night for a reason. You don't have to keep running anymore. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but this time she didn't wipe it away. She whispered, Then I stay. Hawthorne smiled, relief flooding his chest. Good, he said. Because this house is not a home without you now. That night, Elara slept in a proper bed for the first time since she arrived. Hawthorne gave her his room and slept on the couch by the fire. She didn't protest, but just before she lay down, she touched the wooden star he had given her and placed it carefully by her pillow. And for the first time since she arrived at Widow's Perch, she slept without the haunting presence of fear. Days had passed since the terrifying night the Aureate Dominion came to the Widow's Perch. Hawthorne sat on the small porch, quietly watching the snow melt under the morning sun. He hadn't seen their lights again, but the memory stayed sharp, a constant, low-grade hum of danger. Elara hadn't mentioned them since. She spoke a little more now. Her words were still broken, her voice soft, but she tried. Every time she spoke, it felt like a fragile step into a world she had never been allowed to live in, a world of connection and safety. Inside the cabin, Elara stood at the small, scratched mirror. She touched her reflection gently, as if she wasn't entirely sure the image belonged to her. Her skin was no longer pale with cold, her face had color now. Her bruises had faded. She wore Hawthorne's oversized clothes, the sleeves and cuffs rolled up to fit her small frame. She didn't look like the broken, terrified creature who had knocked on his door that night. She looked like someone trying to be whole again. That day something shifted. Hawthorne was sorting through old supplies when he found a music player, an ancient model, scratched and dusty but still functional. He handed it to Elara with a small smile. It plays music. Want to hear? She nodded, curious. He played a soft, gentle and peaceful tune. Her eyes widened as the melody filled the small room. Her fingers tentatively touched the speaker, her mouth slightly open in wonder. Pretty? She whispered. Hawthorne chuckled. Yeah, pretty? Then she said something new, something that revealed a forgotten past. We had music before. Hawthorne looked up immediately. You did. She nodded slowly. Long ago. Before I was taken. Hawthorne set the player down and sat across from her. Do you want to tell me? She hesitated, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve nervously. She looked down for a long time. Finally, the difficult truth emerged. My name is not Elara, she said softly. Hawthorne blinked. It's not? She shook her head. Elara was the name they gave me when I was sold. Hawthorne's chest tightened painfully. Then what is your real name? She paused, then spoke a soft, complex name, full of vowels and strange, beautiful sounds. Hawthorne couldn't repeat it perfectly. She offered him a sad smile. You can still say Elara. It's okay. No, Hawthorne said, firmly shaking his head. If that name was given by the people who hurt you, then it is not who you are anymore. You tell me what to call you and I will. She was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of that permission. My real name, she whispered, means quiet light in my people's tongue. Hawthorne smiled, A deep, genuine smile of recognition. Then that's who you are, quiet light. You don't have to carry their names anymore. Her eyes watered instantly. They erased my name, my clothes, my hair, everything. They told me I was nothing. Hawthorne leaned forward, his voice a steady anchor. But they were wrong. She wiped a tear away, whispering a deeper fear. I believed them. I thought, if no one remembers me, then maybe I don't exist. You exist, he countered, shaking his head. You are here. You survived. She then rolled up her sleeve and showed him something he hadn't seen before. A faint, faded scar near her shoulder. A burn mark. It was not natural. They branded me, she said, her voice shaking again. Told me I was owned. Hawthorne felt white-hot anger rise in his chest. He wanted to find the people who had done that and make them feel every ounce of the pain she had felt. But he stayed calm for her. You're not owned, he said. You're free. That scar does not define you. She nodded slowly. Then for the first time she reached forward and held his hand. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, Hawthorne said honestly, curling his calloused fingers around her small, delicate hand. But we don't have to be scared alone. They sat like that for a while. Two people from different worlds, both carrying wounds, finding comfort in shared, silent presence. Later, Hawthorne brought her an old box with hair ties and a small mirror. Want me to help with your hair? He asked. She smiled shyly. Yes, please. He gently brushed it out. It was long, tangled, and soft like silk. As he worked, she told him more about her people, the Nokari. She spoke of her home planet, about the way the stars looked from there, and about how she used to sing to her younger sister who was taken first and never returned. I haven't sung since, she finished quietly. Hawthorne didn't press her. He just listened. That night, when the fire crackled and the wind howled softly outside, she surprised him. She sang a quiet, haunting melody in a language he didn't know. But he understood the feeling. It was sorrow, it was memory, and ultimately, it was survival. In that moment, Hawthorne realized she wasn't just healing. She was remembering who she truly was. Ashale, the quiet light. The snow fell gently outside the widow's perch, dusting the trees and rooftops in soft white. Inside, the cabin was quiet, warm, and peaceful. Elara, now Ashale, sat near the window. She no longer curled up in fear, and she no longer flinched at every sound. Her hands were steady now, busy sewing a patch onto a wool blanket. Hawthorne had taught her the basics and she had picked it up fast. Her stitches weren't perfect, but they were strong. Hawthorne watched her from the kitchen. He made tea, 1 cup for himself and 1 for her, just the way she liked it. She smiled when he brought it over, accepting it with both hands like a sacred gift. Her eyes, once filled with shadows, now held that new light, the same quiet light her true name meant. They hadn't spoken of the Aureate Dominion since that terrifying night. But both of them knew it wasn't over. Somewhere out there, the ones who had branded her, chained her, and stripped her identity were still searching, still watching. But here in this cabin she was no longer prey. She was a person, and Hawthorne treated her as such, gently, respectfully, as someone worth everything. She looked up from her sewing. You built this house yourself? Hawthorne nodded. Took a few years, piece by piece. It was just me back then. She looked around, smiling faintly. Now it's not just you. He smiled too. No. Now it's a home. Later that day they walked together in the freshly fallen snow. Ashale wore a thick coat Hawthorne had adjusted for her size. It still hung loose on her shoulders, but she didn't care. She lifted her head to the sky, eyes closed, letting the snowflakes fall on her face. For a second she looked like someone who had never known pain. Do you ever miss the cities? She asked quietly. Hawthorne shrugged. Too loud, too fast. Here I can breathe. She nodded. I think I can breathe here too. But peace as always was fragile. That night the power suddenly flickered. Not from the weather but from something else. Hawthorne's instincts kicked in instantly. He grabbed his scanner, a basic but useful device that could pick up nearby signals. A red light blinked furiously. Something was approaching. He turned to Ashale. Basement. Now. She didn't ask questions. She followed him without hesitation. He hid her beneath the trapdoor again just like before. But this time she didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply looked at him and said, Don't let them take me. Hawthorne placed a hand on her cheek. They won't. Not while I'm alive. He shut the door and covered it. Then he waited. The knock came minutes later. Art. Sure. Demanding. Hawthorne opened it this time. Hawthorne's hand was steady on the heavy wooden door handle. He knew he was walking into danger, but he refused to let fear control him. He had promised Ashale, the quiet light, that they wouldn't take her. He wasn't going to break that vow. He pulled the door open, letting the cold air rush in. Standing on his porch, illuminated by the harsh, cold light of a descending craft hovering just beyond the treeline, were three figures. They were tall, heavily armored, encased in dull silver suits that reflected the snow. These were the agents of the Orient Dominion, the people who had enslaved the Nokari. The central figure stepped forward, its voice a flat, synthesized monotone that cut through the silence of the night. "Human. You resist arrest. You harbor stolen property." Hawthorne took a step out onto the porch, standing firm between the alien agents and the safety of his cabin. "There is no stolen property here," he declared, his voice steady, despite the heavy pounding of his heart. "There is only a girl who needed help. And this is my home." The Dominion agent didn't react to emotion. "She is designated Unit 74E. A non-sentient commodity. Failure to surrender the unit immediately will result in forfeiture of your life and property." Hawthorne felt a surge of cold fury. "She has a name. It's Ashale. And she is not a commodity. She's a person." The agent's head tilted slightly, an unnerving, mechanical movement. "Your emotional designation is irrelevant. The unit belongs to the Dominion. We traced her escape beacon to this coordinates. We will not be leaving without her." Hawthorne knew he couldn't fight them physically. His only weapon was his conviction, his pure, unwavering refusal to treat Ashale like a thing. He stood his ground, radiating determination. "You can take your laws and your designations and get off my land. I told you she is not here." "A lie," the agent stated dismissively. "Our scans indicate a life form matching her genetic marker is currently within the structure." Hawthorne's mind raced. He had no real defense, no military equipment. All he had was the small collection of tools he had used to build his life and his home. He reached down and subtly rested his hand on the handle of his heavy-duty snow shovel, propped against the porch railing. "Go back to wherever you came from," he threatened, his gaze fixed on the leader. "She is under my protection. I don't care about your laws or your dominion. She came to me and I made it my battle." Before the Dominion agents could respond, a quiet, strong voice came from behind Hawthorne, a voice that was no longer shaky, no longer fearful. "I'm not hiding anymore." Hawthorne spun around, his blood running cold. Ashale stood in the doorway. She was wrapped in the thick wool blanket he had given her, but her stance was perfectly straight, her head held high. The glow in her eyes was no longer that of fear, but of an intense, inner resolve. "Ashale, no." Hawthorne protested, reaching for her, trying to push her back into the cabin and the safety of the basement. She held up a small, steady hand, stopping him. "It's okay, Hawthorne," she said, her voice sounding clearer, stronger than he had ever heard it. She walked past him, crossing the porch, stepping down into the fresh snow that fell around her like a curtain of quiet light. She stood directly in front of the three massive, terrifying armored agents, her small figure dwarfed by their size and the looming shadow of their ship. Yet, in that moment she was the strongest person on the porch. "I am not your property," she said, looking directly at the leader. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of everything she had endured and everything she had found again. "You erased my name, but I remembered it. You took my freedom, but I found it again and I will never go back." The Dominion agent stood completely still. The silence stretched out, broken only by the soft hiss of the hovering craft. One of the agents, the leader, slowly reached forward. Hawthorne's heart leaped. He grabbed the heavy-duty snow shovel from the railing and raised it instinctively. "Touch her and I swear, you will regret it." But the alien agent paused. Its hand stopped inches from Ashale's shoulder. Something shifted in its mechanical posture. It lowered its hand slowly, then its weapon. "Very well," the agent said, the monotone voice now sounding almost hesitant. "If she speaks for herself, the law allows self-declaration." Hawthorne lowered the shovel slightly, completely stunned by this unexpected turn. Ashale stood tall, waiting. The agent stared at her with its blank, reflective mask. "But your designated service name, Elara, is struck from the record. You have no place, no legal standing. You are legally no." Ashale met its gaze without flinching. "Then I'll make one here." The agent stood still for another agonizing moment, processing her defiance. Then it turned its back. "This unit is currently operating outside the acceptable parameters for reclamation. Retreat." The three agents of the Orient Dominion turned and marched back toward their hovering craft without another word. The powerful machine rose slowly, lifting into the dark, silent sky, leaving behind only the footprints in the snow and the smell of ozone. Silence returned to the widow's perch. Hawthorne stood there, gripping the shovel, completely stunned. It was over. He slowly walked to a shale, dropping the shovel in the snow. "You didn't have to come out," he whispered, his voice trembling now that the danger was past. "You risked everything." She turned to him, and her eyes held a peaceful clarity he had never seen before. "I did," she said simply. "This time I wanted to choose. I chose you." Back inside the cabin, the fire was already being rekindled. Hawthorne poured her tea with shaking hands. His own adrenaline was finally starting to crash. Ashale sat beside him, calm, peaceful, and utterly free. He looked at her, his voice still catching slightly. "You still want to stay?" She smiled, the same quiet, glowing smile that had melted the ice from his heart on that very first night. "You said something once," she whispered, her hand reaching for his. "That this wasn't just a house anymore." He nodded, looking into her eyes, seeing the full, beautiful person who had overcome the worst the galaxy could throw at her. "Then let me stay forever," she said. And Hawthorne knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that his life of solitude was over. He had found something infinitely more valuable than peace. He had found home built not of wood but of kindness, courage, and unconditional love. He smiled back, taking her hand. "Forever sounds perfect. What an incredible journey." Ashale, the quiet light, found her voice, she found her strength, and she found a place to call home with Hawthorne at Widow's Perch. It just goes to show you that even in the deepest cold and the darkest reaches of the universe, a single act of kindness can change everything. If this story of hope, redemption, and defiance touched you, please give this video a huge thumbs up, share it with your friends, and hit that subscribe button. It truly helps this channel grow so we can keep bringing you these incredible stories. Did you love the moment Ashale declared her freedom to the Aureate Dominion? Let me know your favorite part in the comments below. What kind of stories would you like to hear next? Your suggestions always inspire me. Be kind to strangers, be brave when the odds are against you, and never forget that even the most broken things can be put back together and shine brighter than before. Thank you for watching, and from me and the Quiet Light, we wish you all good fortune and peace. I'll see you in the next story.